In the year 177, a great empire stretched across the known world. This was the Roman Empire, a civilization of incredible power and ambition. Its ruler was the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He was a man who wrote about wisdom and justice, yet his reign was marked by war, plague, and internal strife. In a distant part of this empire, in a region called Gaul, lay the bustling city of Lugdunum. Today we call it Lyons, in modern-day France. It was a vital hub of trade and Roman culture, a place where people from all corners of the empire came together. But beneath the surface of this prosperous city, a dark and terrible chapter in human history was about to unfold. Life in Lugdunum was a mix of Roman order and local Gallic traditions. Grand amphitheatres stood as symbols of Roman might, where citizens gathered for entertainment. The marketplace bustled with merchants selling goods from as far away as Africa and the East. The Roman gods were worshipped in magnificent temples, their rituals a part of daily life and civic duty. To be a good Roman citizen meant honouring these gods, for they were believed to ensure the prosperity and safety of the empire. It was a world built on tradition, power, and a shared set of beliefs that held the vast and diverse empire together. Into this complex world, a new faith had arrived. It was a quiet faith, practiced not in grand temples but in homes and hidden gatherings. This was Christianity. For the Romans, it was a strange and unsettling belief system. Its followers spoke of one God, not the many gods of Rome. They refused to participate in the imperial cult, the practice of worshipping the emperor as a divine figure. This refusal was not seen as a simple matter of personal belief. It was viewed as an act of defiance, a rejection of Roman authority, and a threat to the very fabric of society. This tension would soon erupt into violence. The year 177 was a difficult time for the empire. Wars raged on the frontiers, and a devastating plague had swept through its lands, leaving fear and death in its wake. When things go wrong, people often look for someone to blame. In the cities of Lyons and nearby Vienne, that blame fell upon the small and misunderstood community of Christians. They were outsiders, their customs were secret, and their refusal to worship the state gods made them easy targets. A shadow of suspicion and hatred began to fall upon them, a shadow that would soon lead to one of the most brutal persecutions in the early history of the Church. How did this new faith find its way to the heart of Roman Gaul? The story of Christianity's arrival in Lyons is a story of movement and connection. The Roman Empire, with its vast network of roads and sea routes, was not just a conduit for soldiers and goods, it was also a highway for ideas. Missionaries and merchants, many from the Greek-speaking eastern parts of the empire, travelled to trading centres like Lyons. They brought with them not only their wares, but also their beliefs. The Christian community that formed in Lyons and Vienne was a vibrant mix of people from different backgrounds, united by their shared faith in Jesus Christ. This early church was not a grand institution with towering cathedrals. It was a community, a family of believers who met in private homes. They shared meals, prayed together, and supported one another in a world that was often hostile. The community included people from all walks of life: slaves, free citizens, merchants and artisans. People like Vettius Epagathus, a man of high standing, and Blandina, a humble slave girl, worshipped side by side. This sense of equality and fellowship was radical for its time. It offered a sense of belonging and purpose that many found missing in the formal, impersonal religion of the Roman state. Their beliefs were simple yet profound. They believed in one God, the creator of all things, and in his Son, Jesus Christ, who they believed had died and risen from the dead to offer salvation to all humanity. This message of hope, love, and eternal life was incredibly powerful. It gave its followers a deep sense of peace and a moral compass to guide their lives. They cared for the poor, the sick, and the widowed, creating a strong social network that stood in stark contrast to the often brutal realities of Roman society. Their faith was not just a set of doctrines, it was a way of life that shaped their every action. This way of life, however, put them on a collision course with the Roman authorities. Their refusal to worship the emperor and the traditional gods was seen as stubbornness and atheism. The denial of the gods. Vicious rumors began to spread about their secret meetings. People whispered that Christians engaged in cannibalism, eating the flesh and blood of infants, a twisted misunderstanding of the Christian rite of communion. They were accused of incest and all sorts of immoral acts. These lies painted the Christians as a degenerate and a dangerous cult, poisoning the well of public opinion and setting the stage for the violence that was to come. The Roman world under Marcus Aurelius was not a world at peace. The empire was grappling with immense pressures that created a climate of fear and anxiety. On the northern frontiers, Roman legions were locked in a long and costly war against Germanic tribes. This constant conflict drained the empire's resources and created a sense of instability. Adding to this misery was the Antonine Plague, a pandemic that had raged for years, killing millions of people across the empire. In a world without modern medicine, such a plague was seen as a sign of divine anger, a punishment from the gods for some great offense. This widespread fear needed an outlet, a scapegoat. The Christians, with their strange and exclusive beliefs, were the perfect target. Why were the gods angry? It must be because of these atheists who refused to honor them. This was not an official policy handed down from the emperor himself, but a growing sentiment among the general population. Local governors and officials, feeling the pressure to maintain public order and appease the angry mobs, often turned a blind eye, or even encouraged the persecution of Christians. It was a way to redirect public anger and demonstrate that they were taking action to restore divine favor. In Lyons and Vienne, the Christian community was particularly visible. It was a growing and influential group, drawing converts from various social classes. This success may have bred resentment among their neighbors. Their refusal to participate in public festivals and religious ceremonies marked them as different, as people who did not belong. They were accused of hatred of the human race because they kept to themselves and rejected the core values of Roman society. This social isolation made them vulnerable. When the troubles of the empire mounted, the suspicion that had been simmering for years finally boiled over into open hostility. The storm did not break all at once. It began with small acts of exclusion. Christians were banned from public spaces, the markets, the bathhouses, the forums. They were shunned by their neighbors and insulted in the streets. This social pressure was designed to make them feel like outcasts, to break their spirit and force them to conform. But the Christians held fast to their faith. This steadfastness only fueled the anger of the populace. The whispers of suspicion soon gave way to the shouts of the mob, and the stage was set for a direct and violent confrontation. The gathering storm was about to unleash its fury. The persecution in Lyons and Vienne did not begin with a formal decree from the emperor. It began on the streets, fueled by mob justice and local hatred. At first, Christians found themselves barred from the normal activities of city life. They were forbidden from entering public baths, the marketplace and other gathering places. This was a form of social death, an attempt to isolate them from the community and make their lives impossible. When they appeared in public, they were met with insults, jeers, and even physical violence. Mobs would shout at them, throw stones, and treat them as the filth of the city. This wave of popular anger quickly escalated. The mobs, no longer content with just shunning the Christians, began to actively hunt them down. They broke into their homes, dragging men, women, and children into the streets. The city authorities, led by the local magistrate, did little to stop the chaos. Instead, they legitimized it. They began to officially arrest the Christians, throwing them into prison to await a formal hearing with the governor of the province. The initial phase of social exclusion had transformed into a full-blown, state-sanctioned roundup of the entire Christian community. Once arrested, the Christians were subjected to intense pressure to renounce their faith. The goal was not necessarily to kill them, but to force them to recant. To a Roman official, a simple act, offering a pinch of incense to a statue of the emperor, was all that was required. It was a test of loyalty to the state. But for the Christians, this act was a betrayal of their one true God. When they refused, the authorities unleashed the full horror of the Roman legal system upon them. They were interrogated under torture, a standard practice in Roman law for slaves and non-citizens, but now applied to citizens as well. The purpose of the torture was twofold. First, it was meant to break the will of the prisoners and force them to deny Christ. Second, it was used to extract confessions to the monstrous crimes they were accused of, like cannibalism and incest. Some, in the face of unbearable pain, did break. Their recantations were then used to demoralize the others. But the vast majority stood firm. Their courage in the face of unimaginable suffering astonished and infuriated their tormentors. The whispers of rumour had become the screams of the tortured, echoing from the dungeons of Lyons. Among the first to be arrested were the leaders of the church in Gaul. One of them was Pothinus, the venerable Bishop of Lyons. He was over 90 years old and physically frail, his body weakened by age and illness, yet his spirit remained strong. When he was brought before the governor, he was asked a simple question: who is the God of the Christians? Pothinus, knowing that any answer would be met with scorn, replied wisely, "If you are worthy, you will know." This calm and dignified response enraged the crowd. He was brutally beaten by the soldiers and the mob, then thrown into a dark prison cell. The old bishop was left with barely a breath in his body. His followers had hoped he would be a powerful witness in the arena, but his martyrdom was to be a quieter, though no less profound one. He survived in the dungeon for 2 days, his spirit holding on even as his body failed. He died there, not from a swift execution, but from the brutal injuries he had sustained and the harsh conditions of the prison. His death was a testament to a life lived in faith, a final act of witness from a leader who refused to abandon his flock, even at the end of his long life. Another key figure was Sanctus, a deacon from the nearby city of Vienne. During his interrogation, his tormentors tried everything to make him reveal his name, his city and his status, hoping to find grounds for a specific charge. But to every question, Sanctus gave the same unwavering reply in Latin Christianus sum, which means "I am a Christian." This was his name, his city, his status, his entire identity. This simple, powerful declaration drove his torturers into a frenzy. They subjected him to some of the most horrific torments imaginable, applying red-hot bronze plates to the most sensitive parts of his body. Despite the agony, Sanctus stood firm, refreshed and strengthened by his faith. His body was a wreck, twisted and scorched, barely recognizable as human. Yet his spirit was unbroken. He became a source of incredible strength for the other prisoners, a living example of how faith could provide endurance beyond the limits of the human body. The story of Sanctus, the man whose only answer was "I am a Christian," became a powerful symbol of how faith could define one's entire being, even in the face of death. His suffering was not a sign of defeat, but a profound victory of the spirit. In this story of giants of the faith, perhaps the most powerful figure was a humble slave girl named Blandina. In Roman society, she was considered to be of the lowest status. Even her fellow Christians were worried for her, fearing that her physical weakness would cause her to break under torture. But Blandina would prove them all wrong. Her endurance was nothing short of miraculous. For an entire day, her tormentors worked in shifts, using every instrument of torture they had. By the end, they were exhausted and admitted defeat, amazed that she was still breathing after her body had been so completely broken. Through it all, Blandina found strength by repeating a simple phrase like a mantra: "I am a Christian, and we do nothing wrong." These words were not just a defiance of her tormentors, they were a source of spiritual refreshment for her. It was as if the act of proclaiming her identity in Christ gave her the power to endure the unendurable. She was not alone in her courage. A young boy, only 15 years old, named Ponticus, was brought with her each day to watch the torture of others, hoping the sight would break his will. But inspired by Blandina's example, he too remained steadfast, enduring his own torments until he died. Other notable figures faced the horror alongside them. Martyrs, a recent convert, and Attalus, a prominent citizen and a pillar of the community, were also subjected to extreme cruelty. They were first forced to face wild beasts in the amphitheatre. When the animals failed to kill them, they were made to sit on red-hot iron chairs that cooked their flesh. The smell of their burning bodies filled the arena, a gruesome spectacle for the bloodthirsty crowd. Yet, even in this agony, they did not cry out in despair. Through their suffering, they bore a powerful witness to the hope that lay beyond the pain of this world. Blandina's final trial was the most dramatic. After watching all her companions die, she was saved for the last day of the games. She was brought into the arena, first scourged, then mauled by beasts, then roasted on the iron chair. Finally, she was placed in a net and repeatedly tossed by a wild bull. Through it all, she seemed to be in a state of joyful communion with her God, talking with Christ, oblivious to the pain. At last, her throat was cut. The pagan onlookers themselves were forced to admit that they had never seen a woman endure so much suffering with such courage. The slave girl had become a queen among martyrs. The cruelty of the persecutors did not end with the death of the martyrs. The Romans believed that the Christian hope for resurrection was tied to the body. To crush this hope, they decided to deny the martyrs a proper burial, an act of extreme dishonor in the ancient world. After the executions in the amphitheater, the mangled bodies of the martyrs were left exposed, guarded by soldiers day and night. They were left to be eaten by dogs and birds of prey, a final humiliation intended to demonstrate the powerlessness of their God to protect them. The surviving Christians were devastated. They longed to collect the remains of their beloved brothers and sisters, to give them the dignity of a burial and to honor their sacrifice. They tried to retrieve the bodies, even attempting to do so under the cover of darkness. Some tried to bribe the guards, but all their efforts were in vain. The Roman authorities were determined to make a point. For 6 days, the bodies lay in the open, a gruesome public spectacle. The persecutors mocked the Christians, asking, "Where is their God now? And what good did their religion do them, which they preferred to their own lives?" This act reveals a deep misunderstanding of Christian belief. The Romans thought that by destroying the body, they could destroy the soul and the hope of eternal life. They believed that without a body to raise, the Christian promise of resurrection was meaningless. For Christians, however, the resurrection was an act of God's supreme power, not something dependent on the physical state of their remains. They believed that God could raise them up even from dust and ashes. The Roman attempt to extinguish their hope was, in the end, a futile gesture based on a profound ignorance of the faith they were trying to destroy. After 6 days of public display, the final act of desecration took place. The authorities gathered what was left of the bodies, burned them to ashes, and then swept the ashes into the nearby Rhone River. They did this with a sense of triumph, believing they had won. They thought they had erased the martyrs from existence, ensuring they would have no part in the resurrection they so confidently spoke of. But they were wrong. They had not erased their memory. Instead, they had ensured that the story of their faith and courage would be remembered forever, carried like the ashes on the water to the far corners of the world. How do we know the intimate details of these horrific events that took place so long ago? Our knowledge does not come from rumor or legend. It comes from an extraordinary historical document, a letter. Shortly after the persecution ended, the surviving Christians in Lyons and Vienne wrote a long and detailed letter to their fellow churches in the provinces of Asia and Phrygia, which is modern-day Turkey, from where many in their community had originally come. This letter was a first-hand account, a piece of journalism from the ancient world, written by the very people who had witnessed the events. This letter is one of the most precious documents from the early church. It was not written as a piece of theology or a philosophical treatise. It was a raw, emotional, and detailed report of what had happened. It names the martyrs, describes their trials, and records their words. It captures the shock, the grief, and the profound admiration the survivors felt for those who had died. The letter was preserved by the early Christian historian Eusebius of Caesarea, who included it in his monumental work Ecclesiastical History, written in the early 4th century. Thanks to Eusebius, this powerful story was not lost to time. Historians consider this account to be highly reliable. The letter was written immediately after the events by eyewitnesses. It is filled with specific names, places, and details that lend it a strong sense of authenticity. While it is clearly written from a Christian perspective and intended to inspire faith, its factual core is not generally disputed by scholars. It provides an invaluable window into the reality of persecution in the Roman Empire, showing how it was often driven by local mobs and governors rather than a consistent empire-wide policy from the emperor. It is history told from the perspective of the victims. The letter's purpose was not just to report the news, it was a call to solidarity and a testament to the power of faith. By sharing the story of Blandina, Pothinus, Sanctus and the others, the survivors were not just memorializing the dead, they were sharing a source of strength and inspiration with other Christians across the empire who might one day face a similar trial. The letter itself became a form of witness, a document that proved that even in the face of the most extreme brutality, the human spirit, fortified by faith, could triumph. It is a story etched not just in the pages of history, but in the heart of the Christian faith. The story of the Martyrs of Lyons is not just a grim tale from the distant past. It is a story that resonates with powerful lessons that echo through time, speaking to us even today. It is above all a profound lesson about the nature of faith. The martyrs showed that faith is not merely an opinion or a belief held lightly. For them, it was the very core of their identity, something worth more than life itself. Their endurance teaches us that true faith is not about a life free from suffering, but about finding meaning and hope within that suffering, a strength that comes from a source beyond ourselves. Their story is also a powerful testament to unity and solidarity. The Christian community in Lyon was a diverse group. It included the elderly Bishop Pothinus, the noble citizen Attalos, the deacon Sanctus, and the slave girl Blandina. In the eyes of the world, they were separated by vast differences in social status. But in the fellowship of their faith and in the shared experience of their suffering, they were equals. They supported one another, prayed for one another, and drew strength from one another's courage. Their story reminds us that in times of trial, community is not a luxury. It is a lifeline. Furthermore, the events in Lyons offer a message of incredible hope. The persecutors used every tool at their disposal to crush the Christian spirit and extinguish their hope in the resurrection. They tortured their bodies, mocked their beliefs, and scattered their ashes, yet they failed. The martyrs faced death not with despair, but with a serene and joyful confidence in a future life with God. Their story declares that physical death is not the ultimate end, and that brutality and hatred do not have the final word. Hope, even in the darkest of places, can be an unbreakable force. Today, nearly 2,000 years later, the world is still a place of conflict and injustice. People still suffer for their beliefs. The story of the Martyrs of Lyons serves as a timeless inspiration. It calls us to examine the depth of our own convictions and to find the courage to stand for what is right, even under pressure. It reminds us of the importance of supporting one another in community and of holding on to hope when things seem bleak. The fire of the persecution in 177 AD has long since gone out, but the light of the martyrs' faith continues to shine, an enduring echo of courage for all time.